Hi, this is Margaret Floyd Berry. I am the founder of Eat Naked, and my job is to inspire and help you feel better in your body than you even knew possible. So today I'm answering a question from Monique, who asks, how can I reduce anxiety through food and diet? In particular, she asks about specific situations like going to the dentist or traveling. So the first thing I want to talk about here is, yes, you can absolutely mitigate anxiety through what you eat. But it's a little bit different than, like taking a pill to kind of chill you out in that moment. It's something that we want to be structuring our diet and lifestyle overall to help mitigate that anxiety as opposed to in a specific situation. So I'm going to talk about it from that more general perspective because that's honestly where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck in terms of results. And there's kind of two sides to this. There's foods that you want to be avoiding, and then there's foods that you want to be eating. And I'm going to start with the foods that we want to be avoiding because these are the things that will really amp up and exaggerate that anxiety, which is exactly what we don't want to be doing, right? So first thing, and this is going to probably sound really obvious, but if you are experiencing anxiety, either generally or just in specific situations, this is the first place to look, which is stimulants. Coffee, caffeinated teas, any kind of stimulating pre-exercise drink that you might do. Any beverage or any food that has any kind of stimulant in it is something that you first and foremost want to take out of your diet. And we all know that feeling of drinking so much coffee and just getting really, really amped up. Well, that absolutely is going to contribute to anxiety. So that's the first thing to do, is cut that stuff out. Next thing is to, since we're talking about beverages, let's talk about alcohol. So we think about alcohol as something that's very kind of calming, and for a lot of people it's that off switch, right? And in the short term it can absolutely be that, but it has a bit of a boomerang effect, and if we lean on that too heavily, it can actually exacerbate anxiety, maybe not in that moment, but in our life overall. So even though we think of this as something that's a bit more calming or sedating, it's actually having the opposite effect in the big picture. So the second piece is to avoid alcohol. Now the third piece is to avoid my favorite thing to talk about, which is sugar. Sugar, oh gosh, there's so many reasons why sugar is not a good thing to be eating, but one of the things that it does is it sends us on these roller coasters of energy highs and energy crashes. And at both ends, the high and the low, it's very stressful on our system, and it sends off these whole hormonal cascades that can often end in anxiety. So again, kind of like alcohol, sugar, we often reach for those sweet and starchy things when we need something kind of comforting, and it can feel sort of soothing and sedating in the moment. But in the big picture, it's going to have a very different effect. So you want to be eliminating those definitely, like the sweets and the straight up desserts, but also things that are really heavy in starches, like a big plate of pasta, or lots of breads and crackers and cereals and grains, like the things that are sort of empty calories that aren't really giving you a lot of nutritional benefit. You want to really minimize those. The next thing you want to avoid is processed foods. Processed foods are actually chemically designed with excitotoxins, which help you crave more, eat more, and they can be very stimulating and very stimulating to that nervous system, which is not what we want, and especially in a situation of anxiety. So again, there's a bazillion reasons why I would love you to make a move away from processed foods to more whole, real foods. But definitely if you are struggling with anxiety, this is a key thing that you want to be looking at. And then lastly, you want to be thinking about those foods that are particularly challenging on the digestive system, because there's a very intimate connection between your gut health and your brain health. It's in our gut where we access all the nutrients from the foods that we eat, and it's where we build our neurotransmitters, which are those, the serotonin and dopamine. These are the happy chemicals that keep us balanced from a mood perspective, basically. So there's a lot of research and attention going on to this in terms of that sort of gut brain connection. But foods, when we talk about what not to eat here, definitely I would encourage avoiding gluten at a minimum because it is so devastating on the gut environment. You also might be somebody who benefits from a completely grain-free diet. And that's really an individual thing from person to person. But if you're really struggling in this area, I would say, number one, from from this perspective, I would pull out gluten. And if that doesn't do it for you, then try pulling out all grains for a little while and see if that makes a difference. So now we've talked about what not to eat. Let's talk about what you want to be focusing on eating. So, that main paradigm of, the more nutrient dense the foods you're eating, the better. So that means more nutritional bang for your buck, and fewer calories, or more nutrition per calorie, I should say. We want to be eating food that is as unprocessed as possible, that's as clean as possible, ideally homemade. In terms of specific nutrients, you want to think of tons of veggies. The more veggies, the better. A great goal for this is to strive for 2 to 3 cups of vegetables per meal. And yes, I even mean breakfast. And I know that sounds crazy, but this is a great source of all sorts of minerals and vitamins, and these phytochemicals that are really helpful for balancing our whole system, including our brain chemistry. We want to be thinking about eating some good, clean protein with each meal. And this can look, different from person to person, but think of things like, wild fish, or chicken, from pasture-raised chickens, eggs from pasture-raised chickens, grass-fed beef or bison. You want to be thinking about the quality of these proteins that you're eating. And you don't need to eat a lot, if you're somebody who leans more to the vegetarian side of things, and the idea of eating some of these animal foods is not exciting to you. Maybe start with eggs and some fish. But these foods are very balancing, very grounding, and that's really important when we're talking about anxiety. That these also contain the key nutrients that then our bodies convert into these neurotransmitters and key amino acids that we use for all sorts of things to balance out the brain. So some good clean protein is really important. And then let's not forget those all important fats. So our brain is primarily fats, and our brains feed off of good clean fats. So again, here you want to be thinking about quality, so organic for sure. We want to be thinking about using fats appropriately, and I did a whole video on this, which if you haven't seen it already, I highly recommend you go check it out. We'll include a link to it, and I teach you what fats to use in what kinds of contexts. So definitely you want to be eating those good fats because they're very stabilizing. They are very, from an energy perspective, they're actually, if you think about your energy burning kind of like a fire, carbohydrates would be more like the kindling, and the fats would be more like the logs, and they provide that nice, stable, even energy. So we really don't want to demonize fats. We want to include them in our diet in healthy amounts. In every meal, you want to make sure there's some good fat content in every meal. And what, I mentioned this before, but just go easy on the grains and beans. This is something that's very custom from person to person. Some people really need them. Other people, it's really hard on the digestive tract, or they find that they get these huge mood swings as a result of them. So that's something that you want to play around with a little bit. Now, Monique asked a really interesting question. She used the dentist example and the travel example. Now, for dentists and sort of these day-to-day life situations that can be more anxiety promoting, I think the more that your baseline diet is supporting you to be more sort of even-keeled and less anxious overall, that's really where you're going to get the most benefit from a dietary perspective. I want to talk about travel specifically here because that's actually the time where most people throw all this stuff to the wind. That's when the caffeine comes in more if you're managing jet lag. It's when the alcohol comes in because you're on holidays. It's when, a lot of poor choices come in. And there's really no more important time especially if you're someone who's maybe nervous flying, or you get anxious when you're away from home, there is no more important time to stick with your diet. And I know that this is hard. I know it is so tempting. I fly a lot, I travel a lot, and I know that temptation of you think, oh, this is, sort of something fun and I'm away from home. Really tempting to have that glass of wine on the plane or to have that extra cup of coffee. And I really, really encourage you to be very strict with yourself, particularly when you are changing time zones, to really be conscious of what you're eating. We'll do an entirely separate piece here on what kind of food and snacks and hydration options we bring when we travel, because this is something that I never want to leave in the hands of the airlines, or I just want to make sure that I'm taking full control over this. But definitely don't use travel as an excuse to break all of these things that I'm talking about here. Use it as a reason to continue to do those things. So thank you so much for a really great question, Monique. And if you have questions, I would love to hear from you. Please just post them in the comments below. We're going to be doing a lot more of these videos answering your questions. So I look forward to hearing from you. Hey guys, so just a little PS to that last video. If this is a topic, this anxiety and food is a topic that's of interest to you, My very good friend and colleague, Trudy Scott, literally wrote the book on anxiety and food. It's called The Anti-Anxiety Food Solution. I highly recommend it. She goes into a lot more depth on the things that we just talked about here today, gives you some great protocols for you to try at home. So if this is this kind of stuff you're interested in, highly recommend you check out this book.